This is Greek with David Hutchison. Diagramming. I want to talk today about diagramming, which may surprise you but can often be one of the most beneficial things that you can do to help understand the text. Some students have told me before, after being completely uninterested in diagramming, that this was actually something that really helped things to click more so than they ever had before. This is a great way to visualize the text. It causes you to think about every single word. And what are all of these words doing together to form the argument that the author is trying to present? So let's start with the basics. One of the first things you can do is look at a subject, verb, and object. So a subject, verb, and object will go on the main line. The subject is on the left. There's a vertical line that goes between the subject and verb. It goes all the way through the line. And then the direct object is on the right. This little line that meets the baseline shows you that you're dealing with the direct object. So in English, John ate apples. Subject, verb, object. Let's see an example in Greek. Agapesin ha theos ton kosmon. God loved the world. Ha theos, agapesin ton kosmon. Now what I'm doing here is I'm grouping the article with the word that it modifies. You could put ha under theos, but it starts to get cluttered if you do things like that. So I'll recommend that you put the article with the word that it modifies. And also, if you had a negative word, so let's just say this says God did not love the world. If it said uk agapesin, we would put uk with the verb agapesin. Aren't you glad to know that God does in fact love the world? So that was a subject, verb, object. How about when you have a being verb? If you have a being verb and then you have either a predicate nominative or a predicate adjective, those words go on the main line also, but there's a slanted line that shows you that you're dealing with a being verb and a predicate nominative or predicate adjective. I kind of think of this like an arrow pointing backwards all the way over to the subject, because a predicate nominative or a predicate adjective is telling you something about the subject. So here we have Elizabeth is tall. This is a predicate adjective. It's an adjective. Here's a Greek example with a predicate nominative because it's a noun. Ha theos, phos, estin. God is light. So we put ha theos in the subject slot, estin in the verb, and phos is the predicate nominative, and this slanted line points backwards to the subject. If you have a compound subject, they're joined together in the subject slot. So here in Acts 16, we have Paul and Silas singing a hymn to God. They were hymning God. Paulos kai Silas humnun ton theon. So Paul and Silas, that's the subject, goes in the subject slot. Here's the verb, humnun, they were hymning, they were singing a hymn to, ton theon, to God. You can also have a compound verb. So you do the same type of bracket, but you put it in the verb slot. So let's say we have the sentence, David mowed and watered the grass. So subject is David. Here are our compound verbs, mowed and watered. And then he did both of these to the grass. He mowed the grass and he watered the grass. That's why these lines come back together. So here's one from John 6:69. We have believed, hemes pepistukamen, kai egnokamen, and we have known, hati, that, su e, you are, ha hagios tu theou. You are the Holy One of God. So here's one way to diagram it. Hemes is the subject, we, pepistukamen, the verb, we have believed, and We have known. Now look what I've done here. I've only decided in this diagram that this clause, you are the Holy One of God, is the object of the verb agnokomen. We have known. So this diagram is saying we've done a couple of things. Number one, we have believed, period. Number two, we have known this, that you are the Holy One of God. Diagramming is forcing me to think, how is this clause functioning? Is it the object of believed? So could you say we have believed that you are the Holy One of God? Or is it we have known that you are the Holy One of God? Diagramming forces me to think through these things. Now, if I do it a different way, if I say, no, I think this clause is the object of both verbs. We have believed that you are the Holy One of God, and we have known that you are the Holy One of God. So this will force you to dig into the text and say, well, let me look at the context. What is it that it says they've believed? And what is it that it says they have known? So diagramming makes you think at a deeper level than you might otherwise have thought. You can do the same type of compound bracket when you have a compound direct object. So here we have David threw footballs and baseballs. One verb, but both objects are relating to that same verb. David threw footballs and baseballs. So here's an example from Mark 5:37. I've abbreviated the text a little bit. It says, he did not permit anyone to go with him, but he did permit, and the verb is assumed, he permitted or he allowed, ton Petron, kai Jacoban, kai Ioannein, ton Adolphon Jacobu. So he permitted or he allowed Peter, ton Petron, and James, Jacoban, and Ioannein, and John. So this is a compound direct object. Could be 2 items, could be 3, could be 20. Now right here I'll show you again later, but this is how you do something in simple apposition. So here's John, and the equal sign equals the brother of James. So this is how you do something in simple apposition. Use the equal sign, and then you stick that item right out to the right. Now you could have a compound verb, and each verb takes its own object. Well, you say, why do I care? Well, look at this example. David mowed the lawn and watered the flowers. David mowed. What did he mow? He mowed the lawn. What did he water? He watered the flowers. You don't put them back together, because if so, I'm in a lot of trouble, because I mowed the lawn and I mowed the flowers. So no, what I did is I mowed the lawn. That's all I mowed. What did I water? I watered the flowers. Now look at this at Matthew 2:11. When gifts are brought to Jesus, they saw the child and worshipped him and offered gifts. So Adon, they saw the child, ta paidion, kai, and prosekunesan auto, they bowed down to him or they worshipped him. Now when I'm asking the question, whom did they bow down to? Whom did they worship? And I see plainly in the text they bowed down to him, to Jesus, to the child. I see now something important is going on. They're bowing down to a baby. They're worshiping this child. That's a pretty significant thing. Now this, by the way, is a dative direct object, because this verb can take, in our period, it can take a dative direct object. So they saw the child and they worshipped him or bowed down to him, and they offered gifts. Do you remember double accusatives? These are not compound direct objects joined by kai, but these are double accusatives. So we had one type which was called a double accusative person thing. Now we still put these in the direct object slot. So I bought Marianne flowers. And let's just assume that Marianne is accusative. In English, you might think, that should be the for idea. I bought 4 Marianne flowers. So that would be dative. But Greek sometimes does this in accusative. So I bought Marianne flowers. John 14:26. He will teach you all things. Ekenos, didaxe. So he will teach humas, he will teach you. And what will he teach you? He will teach you panta. He will teach you all things. Now there was another type of double accusative that we called a double accusative object complement. So here both go in the direct object slot, but since it's a complement, what we're going to do is use this backward slash that we used with a predicate nominative or a predicate adjective. She named him the winner. So subject, verb, object. She named him. What did she name him? She named him the winner. Matthew 22:43. Dawid kale autan kurion. David calls him Lord. And here this slanted line is pointing backwards to that object. Let's look at how we can use adjectives. You put an adjective under the word that it modifies. So if we had the sentence, the tall, happy, wise boy ate the green apple. Now I could have had a sentence that said the tall boy ate the apple, but as many adjectives as you have, you simply put them under the word that they modify. So the main idea is boy ate apple. What kind of a boy? Well, he was tall, he was happy, he was wise. What kind of an apple did he eat? A green one. Now, keep in mind that diagramming can help you to outline a message. If this were a biblical text, then the main idea of your text would be a boy ate an apple. So that's the big idea. The boy ate an apple. Now, your subpoints of this big idea, what kind of boy was this? He was a tall boy. He was a happy boy, and he was a wise boy. What kind of an apple? It was a green apple. So if you're ever unsure how to outline a biblical passage, once you diagram it, you see the big picture, and then you see kind of the subpoints, and you can build an outline straight off of that. Hutas estin ha huiasmu ha agapetas. This is the Son. It's mu, my son, and it's the beloved Son. So mu is actually a pronoun and agapetas is an adjective, so you treat them the same way. You put them under the word that they modify. In Greek, we often see noun modifiers, that is, nouns that modify other words. A righteousness from God has been revealed, dikaiosune theou pephanerotai. So the main idea is righteousness has been revealed, so subject verb, and then the word theou modifies righteousness. And it causes you to ask the question, well, in what way does this modify dikaiosune? And you can explore all of the genitive options studied before. So this is a genitive one. You see that genitives often modify nouns. Dative nouns tend to modify verbs. They can do other things too, but they tend to modify verbs. Ex ebelin ta pneumata logo. He cast out the spirits, dative logo, with a word or by means of a word. So this dative modifies the verb. So guess where you put it? Under the verb. He cast out the spirits, logo, right under that verb. So you're putting things under the words that they modify. How about an adverb? An adverb will often modify a verb. It's to the verb. That's what adverb means. It can modify a verb, an adjective, or another adverb. You just put it under the word that it modifies. So here, take some advice. The student thoroughly edited the paper. Main idea, the student edited the paper. How did he edit it? Thoroughly. So Mark 15:4, ha Pilatos Paulin eperota auton. Pilate asked him again, subject, verb, object, and then this adverb modifies the verb. An indirect object also goes under the verb. She gave me a pen. She gave, then here indirect object goes under the verb. She gave me a pen. Now I honestly don't care if this line goes straight down or slanted this way or slanted that way, so long as you put them in the right spot. That's what I'm interested in. Lege auto ha Jesus, Jesus says to him. I put Matthew 21:42. Of course, you can imagine that this phrase occurs in a bunch of places. So subject, verb, and then indirect object right under the verb. Where would a prepositional phrase go? Well, it's going to go into the word it modifies. It might modify a verb or it might modify a noun. So let's say we had this sentence, she threw the ball over the fence. She threw ball, main idea. This phrase, over the fence, what kind of a question does it answer? Well, it answers a where question, which modifies the verb. So we put this phrase under the verb. She threw it where? Over the fence. Here's the preposition, and then here's the object of the preposition. This same type of line. Up here we have an object. It's a direct object. Right here we have an object that's the object of the preposition. So we're using the same type of thing. Christos huper haimon apethanen. Christ died for us. Christ died for us. Preposition, object. Now what if the prepositional phrase is modifying a noun? As in, he met the president of the club. Well, see, we're putting it under the noun it modifies. So, ek tu aklu paloi epistuson. Many of the crowd believed. Many believed, and ek tu aklu modifies the word many. So we put it under the word that it modifies. Now, in addition to having single words or short phrases that modify words, we could have an entire clause modify some word. So you would put that entire clause under the word that it modifies. So let's say I had a dependent clause that was an adverbial dependent clause. In other words, it's a dependent clause that tells you something about the verb. It's to the verb. Well, you would put it under the verb. So for example, she paid the bills while he washed the car. That's an adverbial clause. While is our conjunction that introduces it. While he washed the car. So it goes under the verb. She paid bills, subject, verb, object, while he washed the car. And we can put that little conjunction right on the line right there. Here's John 16:6. Sorrow has filled your heart. Then we have this hati clause. Hati, because I have spoken these things to you. So this entire clause, because I have spoken these things to you, tells you why sorrow has filled your heart. A why question is an adverbial type of question, so we put it under the verb. Let's say I have a dependent clause that modifies some kind of a noun. Well, then you just stick it under the noun. So for example, the man who won the contest bought flowers. So the phrase who won the contest is a relative clause, uses that relative pronoun who. Main idea is the man bought flowers. But what kind of a man? It's the man who won the contest. So we put that clause underneath the word that it modifies. Now see, I've done it here with this straight line. You can also do it, if you prefer, with a dotted line, showing that this is a different clause, but it's connected. It's modifying the man. Still the same structure here. Who won the contest? It doesn't matter to me which you prefer. At the end of the day, the reason you're doing this is to think through the text more clearly, to think about relationships, And so do it in a way that helps you to do so. So here's 1 John 2:7. The old commandment is the word which you heard. Okay, so the word which is referring back to logos, the word which you heard. Okay, so that's why we have the dotted lines connecting that. Now, which you heard is a clause. It's a relative clause. If we put that clause on its own terms, the verb is you heard, and the object is which. So that's why it looks like this. You heard which. What is which? Which is halagos. So that's how this one looks. Infinitives. These could modify a noun, or they could go under a verb, just depending upon whatever they're doing in the sentence. So let's say I have the sentence, to eat oranges is wise. So here's the infinitive phrase, to eat oranges. You put it on these little stilts, and it comes after this double slash. So here's the infinitive, to eat. Here's the object, oranges. To eat oranges. All of that is the subject of is, and then the predicate adjective wise. So look, this is really just sitting in the subject slot. And since there's a lot to it, we're putting it up on stilts. And this is what an infinitive looks like right here. So to eat oranges is wise. Now if I happen to say for John to eat oranges, then I would put John right over here on the left, because that would be the subject of the infinitive clause. And the word for would go right up above on a little bitty pedestal. So here's a famous infinitive clause in Philippians 1. For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. So here's the infinitive tazein, to live. That's the subject of the implied being verb esten, so that's why we put it in parentheses. It's not actually in the text, but it's implied. To live is Christos. To live is Christ. And, kai, on the conjunction, to die is gain. And then emoi is modifying everything, so it's for me or with respect to me. So that's why we're putting it under a line that's pointing to all of this rather than just one single item. What if you had an infinitive that was adverbial? It was telling you something about the verb, such as, I bought the book to study, answering the question why. Well, if it's modifying the verb, you stick it under the verb. I bought book, why? To study. So here's an infinitive in Philippians 1, 9 through 10. This is part of what Paul prays for them. He prays that their love may abound. So here's he agape, parasue, that your love may abound. Still more and more. Malon, kai malon, and eti. Abound how? In epignose, in knowledge, and in all insight, kai aisthese passe, so in all insight. And then this infinitive phrase, so that you may test the things that differ. So all of this is still modifying the verb parasue, and we can put it like this. Eis ta, for you, humos is the subject of the infinitive, to test the things that differ. Ta dia feronta. This is a participle, so you can stick it up like this. Now if you look at this, he prays that love may abound. So that might be the main idea of a Bible study or sermon, praying that love may abound. And then what does abounding love look like? Well, it can look like this. It abounds more and more. It might abound in knowledge. So now you have to think about the fact that part of abounding love is knowledge and insight. So if my love is abounding, it may be reflected in these types of things, in knowledge and in insight. And then this is the purpose phrase. Why do we want to have abounding love? So that we can test the things that differ, test the differing perspectives. If you really love someone, you don't want bad things for them. Love does not rejoice in unrighteousness. So if you have abounding love, it can help you to test what is good, what is bad, and to do your best to keep them from what is bad. Commonly, people think if you love me, you'll let me do whatever I want to do. But that's not biblical love. Biblical love does not rejoice in unrighteousness, and it doesn't help people to get there. So participles. You remember that a participle could be attributive, it could modify a noun. It could be substantival, it can act like a noun. Or it can be adverbial, it can modify a verb. So whatever it's doing in the sentence, that's where we're going to put it. So let's say we have a participle that's a substantival participle. It's acting like a noun. Let's just say that we have one that's going to act like a subject, such as the one who studies the notes earns a very strong grade. So the subject is this participial clause, the one who studies the notes. So we've put that whole clause up on stilts, and here's the participle, and here is the object. All of that is the subject of the verb earns. And what do they earn? A grade. What kind of a grade? A strong grade. Not only is it strong, but it's a very strong grade. Now, if a participle were an object, then it would show up over here in the object slot. So here's John 3:36. He who believes, ha pisteuon, eis ton huion, in the Son, eke, zoein, ionion. So he who believes in the Son, all of that is the subject, so it's in the subject slot, of the verb eke, has life. What kind of life? Everlasting life. So here's the participle, ha pisteuon. Then this is a little prepositional phrase. So just like we've done before, we put that under the word it modifies. So he who believes in the Son, all of this is the subject of eke, has everlasting life. Let's say we have an attributive participle, such as the praying family can endure. What kind of a family is it? It's a praying family. So we would put the participle praying, assuming this is a participle for this example. We would put that participle right here, the praying family, and then here's the verb, can endure. So John 21:24. This is the disciple who testifies about these things. This is the testifying disciple. So here's the main idea. This is the disciple. What kind of a disciple? Here's the participle. It's the one who testifies, and then we put that prepositional phrase right underneath that because that's what he's testifying about these things. So the participle modifies hamathetes, so that's where we put it, right under hamathetes. Then if you have an adverbial participle, it modifies a verb, so you stick it under the verb. He studied Greek while watching the game. While watching the game modifies the verb, so we put it under the verb. So here's Romans 5:8, great verse. Christ died for us, Christos apethenen. He died for us, huper hemon. But when did he die for us? While we were, participle, sinners. While we were still sinners or yet sinners. And the while idea is built into the participle here. So this whole participial clause modifies the verb, so you put it under the verb. Now I showed you one of these a moment ago, but let's just treat it on its own. How do you treat something in apposition, an appositive? You use these equal signs and then you stick the item next to whatever it's modifying. So she called Matthew her brother. subject, verb, object, she called Matthew. And then here's the word in apposition. So you put equal brother, and it's her brother. So here's this example. He took Peter and James and John. Who is John? John is further identified as Tan Adelphan Jacobu, the brother of James. We use this equal sign. A command would occupy the verb slot. So if I had the sentence wash the car, the command is the word wash. We put it in the verb slot. Here's the object, the car. Who's going to wash the car? Well, a command implies you normally. So you, put in parentheses, you wash the car. Here we have 2 Timothy 4:2. Some of the last things that Paul ever wrote. He writes to Timothy, Keruxon ton logon. Preach the word. We don't have an explicit subject, so we put an X in the subject slot. Now if we had a prohibition, a negative command, we just stick that negative word with the imperative. This is in my view. Other people would put it below, but I think it makes a lot more sense to put it right where it goes. Me crinete, do not judge. Now, by the way, on this verse, probably one of the most misunderstood verses in the New Testament, there's more to the story than just do not judge, period. You first have to look at yourself, and then you can examine someone else. But if there is an examining of someone else, it doesn't mean what do not judge commonly is understood to mean, that you can't ever say anything about anybody else. But you better check to make sure you don't have a telephone pole in your own eye. What if you had a vocative or an interjection? The solid line goes on a little bitty dotted line right at the beginning of the main baseline. So children, obey your parents. So you would put it right here. Children, understood you, obey your parents. So here Ephesians 5:25. Husbands, love your wives. Love the wives. Here the word tas acts like a pronoun. We're assuming this to be used for direct address, and we're assuming that this is an imperative. But if this happened to be simply a nominative and an indicative verb, it's the same form. You just have to decide, is it an imperative or is it an indicative on this second plural form. If it is subject, verb, object, then you would do it like this. But here we're assuming that this is vocative and this is a command. Husbands, love your wives. In the same way, if we had an introductory conjunction like a for, you would stick it on top of this little dotted line on its own little line, for we will see him. So the introductory conjunction sits right here. So Jesus would say, for if you love the ones who love you, what reward do you have? We put the little introductory conjunction right here at the very beginning, for. And then here's you have reward. What reward? If, here's this if clause, modifying the verb, if you love the ones who love you.